Now, here in Nigeria, the Organised Private Sector, OPS, and Labour have kicked against the review by the government in the electricity tariffs. They faulted the timing of the tariff adjustment, considering the economic hardship and recession which have eroded the purchasing power of Nigerians occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. Earlier yesterday, the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, had again increased electricity tariff. However, NERC explained that the Commission had not approved a 50% increase in electricity tariffs, but had only made an approval based on minor changes in the variables that go into the final charges paid by consumers.
An American-trained engineer and an alumnus of General Electric, who currently runs Century Power, a power generation company, Dr. Eloka Umeh. He joins us now for an in-depth discussion on the power sector in Nigeria. Glad to have you join us, Doctor. Now, the NERC, which is the body that regulates electricity, is saying that tariffs will continue to increase until the discos cover their cost. And one is wondering, is that not putting the cart before the horse?
Thank you very much for having me. It's nice to be here. I think there's a lot of misinformation in the power industry. And unfortunately, the public is not really getting all the information they need. I mean, for example, if you go to NERC's website today, the tariff numbers you see there are very old numbers. However, if you put that aside for a second, think about this. Any company that owns a disco or operates a disco has to make enough money to invest in infrastructure, make a profit, and provide the service that people expect. If they are not getting enough money out of the power they sell, they can't make the required investments. And if they don't make the required investments, people don't get the power. So there's a chicken and egg effect here. What we've seen, the multi-year tariff order, MITO, that we've seen, there's supposed to be increases happening since 2015. Those increases haven't happened, and unfortunately, we got the shock. It was like a rude shock that we got late last year when tariffs were increased almost about 100% for most users. Now, people didn't understand that that particular increase we saw in 2020 was supposed to happen gradually since 2015. That's the reality, and unfortunately, we've seen it just in one go.
Okay, let's try and get the chicken and egg sequence aligned, if we may, or even try and draw up a shopping list. What policy market issues are needed to be resolved if we're going to facilitate investment for the stability of the industry?
Well, we have to look at the entire value chain in the power sector to think about this, starting all the way from the gas generators to the gas transporter, owners of the pipeline, to the GENCOs, people that actually produce the power, and then transmission line owner, today is TCN, and then all the way to the DISCO. We need to make policy changes across the entire value chain for the sector to work. Now, if the gas generators are not really incentivized to produce enough gas and sell at the right price for them to make the right investment and also make money, you're not going to see gas. So if that's not happening, you're not going to see enough power. The hydros are there, but they are definitely not enough to satisfy what we need in this country. So the policy changes have to really help the market to become a true willing buyer, willing seller type market. So if you go to a disco to buy electricity, and the price they're selling the electricity to you doesn't work for you, then you should have other options, right? But the disco itself also has to sell at the right price and be sure that year in, year out, they are protected by government policies that allow them to sell at the right price for them to make a profit. If this doesn't happen, it's not going to work.
Okay, good, Doctor. I want to be able to try to balance these things. When government says it hiked the tariff based on inflation rate, Forex, etc., you wonder, is it that the citizens are immune to inflation, that you should force the cost on them? It looks like the government is taking the consumers for granted, or they just don't seem to care about the consumers. You remember recently we also had a price increase in fuel.
Well, I think the government has its hands full. We have this inflation happening. We have the exchange rate running away from us. The government has to do a balancing act across the entire the sector, not just in power, but across all the other sectors. And unfortunately, like I said, the people running the power sector, virtually everything they use, all the equipment they use comes from overseas, so they have to pay dollars. So the exchange rate hits them to start with. And then you know that virtually all the infrastructure across the value chain in the power industry is outdated. So the GENCOs are struggling to update their equipment, the DISCOs are struggling, TCN is struggling to build up its network, and this all costs in dollars. So these guys are dealing with the effects of the inflation, they're dealing with the effects of the exchange rate differences that they're seeing. But then the government, who is supposed to care about the citizens, is also trying to resist raising tariff. But unfortunately, for you to see service in the power industry, for you to see steady electricity, there has to be an increase. And it's unfortunate that it's coming at this time when people are groaning under inflation, people are groaning under cost increases everywhere. You know, so the question is, do you let it stay the way it is, or do you let the government increase the prices so that the value can actually be seen?
Sorry. I get what you're driving at, but I am still at a loss, you know. One would have reasonably assumed or thought that, because what some Nigerians seem to be crying out for is, we don't see this light. Why would you charge me for the light I am not seeing? There's a disconnect somewhere, and government doesn't seem to, understand this. You know, how do you want to explain this away?
It's a very good question that people are asking. We privatize the industry, we raise the tariff, so people should see the electricity. But, you know, the reality is this. It doesn't happen overnight. And I've said it year in, year out. Privatization is just the first step. People expected that once the sector was privatized, that you immediately start seeing 24/7 power. That's not true. I'll give you an example. It takes about 3 years to build a GENCO, a base load generating plant, about 3 years. And before you start building, you will have spent another 3 years just developing that project, you know, getting all the agreements signed, getting the land and everything, getting the loans. So that's 6 years just to build one plant. Now, beyond building the plant, you also have the DISCO problems. You have to change assets in the DISCOs. You have to meter people. This all takes time. So if you don't start to see the right tariffs being charged, unfortunately, you're not going to see all these changes that I'm talking about that are supposed to happen. The government, through NERC, is trying to protect the citizens from what they call price gouging. But unfortunately, I think we're trying to do the right things, but in the wrong way. I keep saying, you know, government should allow this sector to be run by the private sector. Period. Government's job is to provide the correct regulations that will allow this market to grow. You cannot regulate a market into existence. The government is trying to regulate this market into existence, and it will never work. So I'm saying, for this to work, allow the private sector to drive the entire value chain of the power industry, allow competition to come in and drive the right pricing. Give you an example. If you live within the network of the Ikeja DISCO, right, and you have power traders within that network using Ikeja DISCO's assets to get the power to people's homes, competition would make the pricing come down. People will start to see value. I mean, think about the telecom sector, for example. If Glo is not working for you, go to MTN. If MTN is not working for you, go to Airtel, and so on and so forth. So competition is what's driving quality service. Competition is also what's driving the pricing of this commodity. It's a commodity market at the end of the day.
Okay.
And government shouldn't be driving it.
It's interesting what you say. I know people in the Ikeja axis who claim that they're getting up to 24-hour light supply, but you know, maybe we'll touch on that because it seems that those who can afford it basically get it. But I just want to touch on, you mentioned the gas to power strategy. How is that going?
Well, you know, the gas to power strategy starts with gas generation. And I know NNPC and NGC and NGMC are doing the hardest best to get producers producing gas, to get the pipelines built. I mean, they have, they're making investments in large pipelines, OB3 pipeline that takes gas from the east all the way to the west, the AKK pipeline that also takes gas from the east to the north. They should also make some more investments to get gas and use it within the east, and I think they're starting to have those conversations. But it takes time. It takes time to build these pipelines. But I'm saying that beyond the government just making the investments, they also need to make it possible for private investors to come and put money into creating this infrastructure. Encourage the private sector to come and invest their money, because at the end of the day, private sector just wants to make their money. And nobody gets involved in business for their good health. They get involved in business to make money. So the more encouragement you give the private sector, not just within the country, but outside, make it attractive for investors from foreign countries to bring their money here. And there's a lot of money out there to invest. But they want to see certain things. They want to see that the rule of law is in place. They want to see that contracts are respected. They also want to see that the ease of doing business really does exist. They want to know that there's security in the country. This will encourage these investors to come. They were here earlier in the decade. When we started doing this power privatization, a lot of investors came, but some of them left out of disgust. They said, we're not serious. You write a contract today, you sign it, tomorrow it changes. And the regulations continue to change.
All right, we're going to talk about the impact of infrastructure. But before then, you are the CEO of Century Power, a power generating company. How is Century Power driving Nigeria's power generation initiative?
Thank you for that question. Century Power was a brand new company. We started it in 2011, and it participated in the privatization efforts. And then beyond that, we started working on a greenfield plant at Okija in Anambra State. It's supposed to be a 1,500 megawatt plant, 1,500 megawatts plant, run with natural gas. And we've done a lot of work on that. But unfortunately, we've gotten bogged down in the power purchase agreement. Everything for that investment has been done. The first phase of that plant is supposed to be 495 megawatts, open cycle. And it's all done. Just waiting to sign a bankable power purchase agreement. We have investors, European investors, that are willing to put in $1 billion of real money in the Nigerian power sector. However, they will not do that without seeing a bankable power purchase agreement signed with NBET. And we've spent millions of dollars negotiating these agreements, but unfortunately, it's faltered. And it's not just Century Power. There's a few other power companies that have made similar investments to build up power plants. And we are willing and able to invest across the value chain.
Why did it falter?
Well, there's a real liquidity problem in the country. Initially, the folks in the industry thought that Nigeria's problem is generation. They didn't consider the other parts of the value chain: gas generation, transportation, transmission, power transmission, and then distribution. So everyone focused on generation for a while. And then when it came time to sign a power purchase agreement, they found, wait a minute, if we sign this power purchase agreements, we will not be able to collect enough money from the distribution networks to pay the generating company and also pay the power, the gas generator and the gas transmitter. So everything had to be put on standstill. Now everybody is focusing on the distribution network to get it working so that they can collect money when power is sold. But when you fix the discos, then you're going to find that you have a problem elsewhere. And this is what I keep saying. We need to not just look at one part of the sector. We need to look at the entire value chain so they can be fixed simultaneously. We shouldn't do this in series. We should do it in parallel.
All right, Doctor, we're going to get back to you. Interesting discussion. Keep your post now. I'll be back in a bit. You're still watching Newsday.
Okay, you're watching Newsday, and we're still having a conversation with Dr. Eloka Umeh, and just tackling the issues to do with power generation. Now, just continuing from where we left off, what are the issues, policy and market issues that need to be tackled so that the Gencos can actually deliver on their own, objective, which is to generate power?
Thank you, Indy, for that question. I say first thing that we need to do as a people, as a government, as a country is we need to look at the power sector as a business, and run it that way. If you look at it as a business, first thing is first. You need to allow the people that are driving it to do it thinking business first, okay? And if they do it that way, there is going to be a serious handshake between the private sector and the public sector. People's values, people's interests will be protected. That's one. Number two, we need to understand that there should be sanctity of contract. Anytime a contract is entered into between the different parties involved, it should be respected. and backed up by the rule of law. 3, the government should create the, policies that will encourage this market to grow. I keep saying, I make a statement that you cannot regulate a market into existence. What I mean is this: we need to relax the existing policies enough to allow the different investors in the sector to actually operate and deal with each other on a willing buyer, willing seller type framework. What that boils down to is this: if a GENCO needs to buy natural gas from a gas producer, they need to have a negotiation that allows that gas producer to make a profit. That incentivizes them to actually produce that gas. And these agreements are usually very long term, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, okay? And then after the GENCO needs to have agreements with the transmission line owner. That shouldn't be Nigeria, by the way, right? To carry that power to the discos. And then there should be a bilateral agreement between the GENCO, the disco, and the transmitter of the power to carry that power and distribute it. These contracts need to be long-term, these contracts need to be bankable, and they should be backed by the Nigerian sovereign. That way, the investors understand and they are sure that the investments are safe. And then beyond that, the regulations created by the government should be fully enforced and should not be changed willy-nilly at anyone's whims or caprices. You understand? This will make sure that we have a robust enough industry that will allow the investments to come in and stay here. I keep saying that we've done this in the telecoms industry. Yes, I know there are some major differences between the telecoms industry and the power industry. However, if we did it in the telecoms industry, and today we have a working telecoms industry that supports the backbone of business here, it's easy for us to do it in the electricity industry. And there are people in this country that understand this very well, and they should be listened to. Unfortunately, there are also those in the country that don't have an idea, and unfortunately, some of them are being listened to.
Right, Dr. Eloka Umeh, thanks for being on Newsday. Great discussion.